Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron. As crazy as it seems, many people start thinking about January at this time of year when it comes to movies. And that's because in January, it is the Sundance Film Festival. And to get tickets and to figure out where you're going to stay to go to the festival, you start planning now. I don't know if you've ever been to the festival. I went in 2008, and it was a really fun experience. I haven't been to a lot of festivals, but my understanding about Sundance is that it's a breakthrough festival for a lot of artists, and it's a festival where a lot of movie deals are made. In case you're interested in going to the Sundance Film Festival in 2021, according to Tabitha Jackson, who is the new director of the festival, the 2021 Sundance Film Festival will be a grand partnership of communities. It will take place live in Utah, and at least 20 independent and community cinemas across the U.S. and beyond. Utah has been the home of the festival for close to 40 years, and always will be, but the 2021 festival will extend beyond Utah and will be co-created by and for different communities in different locations, preserving what is magical about experiencing films on the big screen with others, even if at a smaller and socially distanced scale. That was a quote from her taken directly from the Sundance Film Festival website. So in honor of the Sundance Film Festival, I decided to look at a bunch of movies that are on Netflix that premiered at Sundance. In the first segment of the show, I'll be taking a look at the movie I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore. And this was the winner of the Grand Jury Prize for the U.S. Dramatic Competition at Sundance. And that was in 2017. In the second segment, I'll be giving you my thoughts on the movie Tallulah, which stars Allison Janney and Ellen Page. In the third segment of the show, I'll be talking about the movie Lost Girls, which came out this year and premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. And then stick around for the end of the show when I'll be sharing my thoughts on The Discovery, which stars Robert Redford, founder of the festival. So let's dive on in. As I mentioned, the first movie I'm going to look at is called I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore. It's a comedy thriller. It came out in 2017. It's rated TVMA, meaning mature audiences. It's an hour and 36 minutes long, and it had its world premiere at the Sundance Film Festival on January 19th, 2017, and it went on, as I mentioned before, to win the Grand Jury Prize for the U.S. Dramatic Competition. It was also the winner of the Austin Film Award at the Austin Film Critics Association, and it was the winner for the Golden Trailer for the Golden Trailer Awards. And it was released by Netflix on the 24th of February in 2017. The summary on Netflix about this movie is, she's tired of being a doormat. Getting robbed was the last straw. Now she and her weirdo neighbor are fighting back. I think that's a pretty good summary, but frankly when I hear it, it kind of lies flat. It doesn't make me feel like I really want to watch this movie. And unfortunately, I think it really sells this movie short. This movie was directed by Macon Blair, and this was his directorial debut. This movie also starred Melanie Lynskey. She is a winner shared with Elijah Wood, among others, of the Best Voice Ensemble in a new television series for Over the Garden Wall, and she won Best Supporting Actress International Competition at the Cine Euphoria Awards, and that was for the 2009 movie called Away We Go. And in 1994, she played opposite Kate Winslet in the movie Heavenly Creatures, and she won the Best Actress Award for that movie from the New Zealand Film and TV Awards. She's been in such movies as Sweet Home Alabama, Flags of Our Fathers, Up in the Air, and Hello, I Must Be Going. And this movie also stars Elijah Wood. He is an award winner as well, having won the Interactive Achievement Award for Outstanding Achievement in Character Performance Male for The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. He was also winner of the Saturn Award for Best Actor for the same movie from the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, USA. He's also won many other awards. He's been in movies like The Good Son, The Ice Storm, Bobby, and The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. So Melanie Lynskey plays the main character, Ruthie. And from the very beginning, we see she really doesn't know how to stand up for herself. She is kind of a doormat. Being assertive is not one of her strong points. And she's also pretty lonely. We see this from the very beginning when she's outside in her backyard. She's hearing a woman laughing and lots of chattering, and she's alone looking at the night sky with a beer. We see her also behind a rocking, polluting truck in traffic. She's also a nurse's assistant, and we see how she helps people, but how the people she helps are just horrible people. She puts up with a lot, and because she does, she's not super respected. And one of the biggest pet peeves for her is that there's somebody who keeps letting their dog do their thing on her front lawn, despite there being a sign showing that she does not want this to happen. And one day she comes home from work and she discovers that her home has been robbed. And instead of getting support from the police, instead she gets pretty much blamed by them, that she left her home vulnerable, and that's why she got robbed. And so she is at her wit's end, and she has decided to take justice into her own hands. She's not going to let anything happen to her home again, and she is going to figure out who robbed her, because the police are not putting a lot of energy into figuring this out. She is able to track a footprint that is in her backyard, put there by a stranger. She talks to the police and tells them what she's expecting of them, and she finally sees who it is that's letting their dog do their thing in her front yard. She scoops up what the dog has left and launches it at this person, and it turns out to be a neighbor of hers that she apparently hasn't really met before. They have an interaction that's really awkward and embarrassing. And later, in her efforts to get to the bottom of what happened with the robbery, she goes around and talks to a bunch of her neighbors to see if they had seen anything. And it turns out one of her neighbors is the person whose dog was doing their thing. This neighbor's name is Tony, and he is played by Elijah Wood. At first, he is pretty intense and pretty weird, and so she doesn't know what to make of him and doesn't feel so safe around him. But when she goes back home and finds an app on her phone has shown where her laptop computer that had been stolen is located, she sees that he may be the perfect partner to help get that computer back, because the police certainly aren't going to go to the effort, so it seems. And as it turns out, he's kind of just as lonely as she is, except for his dog. So he helps her out, and the two of them suddenly have a taste of power. And this gives them a little bit more reason to start hanging out together more. After they deal with this lead about her computer, they get another lead for something else that had been stolen from her grandmother's silverware. So they go on another adventure to recover that silverware, and a whole new little adventure ensues. And on this adventure, she seems to have a sense that she may have run into the person who had done the robbery in the first place, and she is ready to get revenge. One thing leads to another, and she and Tony end up in the home where the person who they believe might be the robber has grown up. They go there as undercover policemen, and they end up having conversations with his parents. And from this point on, so many fun things unfold, and I don't want to give any spoilers. What I will say is that there is an amazing adventure that happens, and not only does Ruthie get to see what she's really made of, but the audience gets to see it as well. And that goes for Tony too. And there are so many gems in this movie, so let me share a few of them with you. The first thing that I love about this movie is how human all the characters are. They are quirky, yet they are very relatable. For example, I think a lot of people can relate to Ruthie's powerlessness and her isolation. And we can relate to Tony's issues of social awkwardness, the fact that his dog is really his best friend, and that church is a safe place for him to go to be around other people. So often in dramas, when we see people who are double-crossed by a crime, they're very brave, or They're very single-minded about how to move forward with things, and we don't get to see a full character in a way. Their characters may have many elements and levels to them, but we don't always see the human side, the insecurities, the true nervousness of confrontation. And these characters help us get in touch with our own vulnerabilities inside as real human beings. And frankly, the only way they have to go is up to improve, because they're already kind of struggling through life. Another thing about this movie is that it is a comedy thriller. And truth be told, there are a lot of comedies that I see that I don't actually find all that funny. They're trying really hard to be a comedy. The script of this movie was written so well, the timing of all the comedic moments played out flawlessly in my book. And I will say, something that rarely happens to me, but did happen to me with this movie, is there was this scene that kept going on that was so funny, I was laughing till I cried. I had to pause the movie. I just was beside myself. And once that split open for me, just so many other scenes had me busting out laughing. I just felt it was masterful how the different elements of this story had built up in such a way that I had that big of a reaction. Now, I think a bunch of the comedy comes simply from the fact, as I mentioned before, that we have these two characters who are very human. They haven't coordinated on their strategy. They don't have a lot of security in themselves. But also, there weren't these outright jokes that were told. It was just in the way things had been formulating. One simple example, without really giving anything away, is that there's a point, as I mentioned before, where both Ruthie and Tony are at the home of the parents of the potential robber of Ruthie's home. And when the mother talks to them and asks them questions, they come up with very different responses and different ways of responding to her questions. And the incongruity and how it sabotages what they're setting up to do is just hilarious. Also, there are different elements that take on different meanings, and then those elements are used in unique ways later on in the movie that help just create really funny situations. I know how I said that sounds kind of abstract. I don't really want to give it away, but I'll share things like the silverware that was stolen from Ruthie is one example, as well as something that has to do with the footprint that she found in the back of her yard. Now, the first 2/3 of the movie, there's a lot of buildup of the story, getting introduced to characters, figuring out what the meaning is for some of these items that I just mentioned. And the last third of the movie is a culmination of everything that happens. There is a confrontation with the people who have robbed Ruthie's home. And now we get to more of the thriller part, and I will say that there is violence, and there are some gory moments. And I was a little disappointed about that in a way. I felt that it canceled out some of the humor that had happened earlier in the movie. And in that way, we certainly go for an amazing emotional ride in this movie. And the way some of the violence happens is shocking, but also funny in a way. But I personally have a hard time laughing at someone else's pain. So just in that aspect, this was a hard movie for me. What I did really love, though, was Ruthie, who is trying to find her power, but clearly had never had assertiveness training. In everything that happens, she seems to pretty much end up being the strong one. Now, she doesn't go unscathed, but she certainly does seem to find some power. And by the end of the movie, she has definitely gone through something and been kind of transformed. And in fact, in some regards, you could even say what she's gone through has been a spiritual journey for her. This was a great story. The script was really well done. I think I mentioned that before. It's tight. There are scenes that are written so well that it keeps us as the audience on our toes. And it's full of surprises. Things that you never expect to happen. So often I talk about in my reviews how movies follow some kind of formula. It's something we've seen before, and maybe there's a new angle or something that's a little bit different. In this one, I can't say that I've seen much that's happened like this before. There may be elements, as in the kind of violence that has happened, but because these characters are so real and so original, everything feels like it's fresh and new. And any characters that may have some similarities to other characters we've seen in other movies, well, it seems this movie purposely tries to poke fun at those kinds of characters. And in that way, I think it gets away with it. And while I'm not sure theatrical is the right word, each scene does seem to be centered around a relationship or an interaction with other people. And that relationship reveals more information about the characters, but also moves the story forward. Each scene is so well done that it feels like it's a story that could stand on its own. And the acting is just terrific. The timing of things that happen, even at one point when Elijah Wood is angry and gets out of the car that Ruthie is driving, and he just puts his hand up in the air. And that says so much, and it was so natural. Those little things that bring out the actor's instincts can make such a difference, and those played out really well in this movie. Another really fun relationship in this movie is the relationship between Ruthie and the detective who is assigned to her case, the case of the robbery of her home. And this detective just seems to be burnt out on what he is doing and feels that Ruthie's situation is so minor compared to other people's situations. He and Ruthie just push each other's buttons, and it is hilarious. I would say in some ways he does play a police detective that is over the top, but he also seems to speak the mind of what you would imagine a police officer would like to say. He gets down to some nitty-gritty truths about the job and what he has to go through. And the blatancy around what that truth is just funny, at least in the way that he is reporting it in this movie. I would say, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, this movie is just full of little gifts and gems, one after another, one unexpected prize after another. I was so wrapped up in what was going on, I didn't have time to think about whether there are any holes or not. Everything just flowed really well. So I highly recommend this movie, especially if you want a good laugh and a great escape. This is definitely one to watch. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent, fantastic movie, I would give it a 10. Granted, I personally am not thrilled with some of the violence in the movie, but that's only my personal taste. But I wouldn't take that away from what the movie actually turns out to be. There is a reason why this movie took home the Grand Jury Prize for the U.S. Dramatic Competition at the Sundance Film Festival. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be looking at the movie Tallulah after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome to the second segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore. I'm now going to discuss the movie Tallulah. This movie premiered at the 2016 Sundance Film Festival. It stars Ellen Page and Allison Janney, and this is the third film they've worked on together. They were also in Juno and in Touchy Feely. This movie is rated TV-MA for mature audiences as there's some nudity, language, and smoking. It's an hour and 51 minutes long. It's considered a comedy drama and an independent movie. It is directed by Sian Heder. She's an award-winning director, having won the Grand Jury Award for Best Narrative Short, the short called Mother, at the Florida Film Festival. That same movie won the Jury Award for Best Short at the Oxford Film Festival in Mississippi. She may be best known as a writer on the series Orange is the New Black. And it appears that Tallulah is the first feature film that she has directed. As I mentioned, this movie stars Ellen Page, and she is an award-winning actress. She won Outstanding Performance for a Female for the movie Marion Bridge at the ACTRA Awards. She won Best Breakthrough Performance for the Alliance of Women Film Journalists for the movie Juno. And she was nominated for Best Performance by an actress in a leading role for the Academy Awards in 2008 for Juno. She has been in such movies as X-Men: The Last Stand, Smart People, and My Days of Mercy. And as I mentioned, this movie also stars Allison Janney. She is an Oscar-winning actress. She won Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for the movie I, Tonya in 2018. And she won a Golden Globe for the same role. And she also has won a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series for Mom. She's been in the movies The Hours, Hairspray, Away We Go, and Spy. And I also wanted to mention Tammy Blanchard, who's in this movie. She did a terrific job, and she has been in such movies as Cadillac Records, Rabbit Hole, Blue Jasmine, and Into the Woods. This movie is about Tallulah, who is played by Ellen Page. Tallulah often goes by the name Lou, and the beginning of the movie starts off with a bang. Lou leaves a bar being chased by a bunch of men who she had essentially taken, and her boyfriend in a van whisks them off to safety. Lou is a risk taker, and she likes living on the edge. And very soon after, we learn that they are living out of her van, and after 2 years of living like that, her boyfriend is ready to have some normalcy. He'd like to live in the city, live in an apartment, have a job, maybe even get married. She, on the other hand, says this is how she rolls, take it or leave it. He decides he's going to leave it. And he is overdue for a visit to his mom, who lives in New York City, near Washington Square Park. He leaves without a goodbye, and this drives Lou crazy. It pushes a big button for her, so she decides that she's going to follow him to New York City, and maybe end things on her own terms. So she arrives, and the first person she thinks of going to visit would be her boyfriend's mother. Her hope is, of course, that she'll run into him there. But she doesn't, and she sees that there's an opportunity here. She is indeed an opportunist, and she finds ways to get money, to steal food, anything to survive, and she's fine with that. She's not one to play by the rules. So she finds a sneaky way to get up to his mother's apartment. His mother is played by Allison Janney, and we learn that she is not a pushover. Lou doesn't quite get her needs met there, so she goes off to find other ways to get her needs met. Soon after, we see her in a hotel, scanning floors to see who has had room service left outside their door, and she is taking food from those plates. It's pretty ingenious, actually, but then something unexpected happens. While she's taking food from one of the trays, somebody opens the door, and it's a woman who's hardly dressed. She's in Spanx. She's curlers in her hair, and she looks like she's getting ready to go out on a big date. Your first thought at this confrontation is that Lou is going to be caught. She's going to get into trouble, and she'll have to figure out how to move on. But that is not at all what happens. The woman, who is playing the character Carolyn, played by Tammy Blanchard, asks Lou if she is part of housekeeping, and Lou just goes along with it. Carolyn invites Lou in, and essentially kind of manipulates her into babysitting her 1-year-old as she goes out on a date, all behind her husband's back. Now Lou has entered to see if there's any opportunity here to get some more food and money. But there's something that's really alluring about Carolyn, and she's so unpredictable and apparently so dangerous for her baby, and also has no qualms about spending large amounts of money, that Lou is enthralled and decides to stay, partly to protect the baby, but also to get some big money. Lou sees what an emotional wreck that this woman actually is, and she feels really sorry for this baby. And it turns out she ends up giving the baby some quality attention that the baby hadn't probably had in some time. And when there's a moment that Lou is going to walk away, the baby just bawls her eyes out. But when circumstances prevail, Lou sees that it makes most sense for her just to take the baby, at least temporarily. She has every intention of returning the baby in the morning, but if she takes the baby overnight, she'll probably be safer than with her mom, who is kind of knocked out from drinking too much, kind of overwhelmed emotionally, and not in any place to look after such a young child. Yet circumstances prevail where it is actually not going to be safe for Lou to return the baby, and she decides to take advantage of having a baby and uses the situation to milk the sympathy of her ex-boyfriend's mother. After all, she's the only person who she is remotely connected to in all of New York, and there's maybe a hope that her ex-boyfriend will show up. So she tells Margot, played by Allison Janney, that this is her son's baby. And reluctantly, that is enough for Margot to open up her home to Lou and the baby. Now it seems that Margot is so enthralled with the baby and also so sympathetic to the baby because it seems that Lou just doesn't have the wherewithal to know the basics of caring for a baby, then Margot shows herself to be a bit naive, probably more naive than she'd care to admit that she is, because she is clearly a woman who has hardened, who has been around the block, and who looks out for herself and her best interest. And yet she has a big heart, and that makes everything more difficult in terms of how she can see things clearly. So Margot believes that with the baby, Lou must actually be family to some extent. And she and Lou form a very human connection. They end up being quite honest with each other. It seems like Lou has no boundaries, and Margot is able to be the mother that Lou hasn't really had. And she calls her on things. At the same time, Lou is creative and has an amazing outlook on life. And for Margot, who has pretty much played it safe, just wanted the security of a family her whole life, is pretty conservative and has a intellectual job at a university and is an author, Lou wakes something up in her, and she starts connecting to a part of her spirit that she hadn't in some time, if ever. And it turns out Margot is recently separated from her husband. He wants to get a divorce, and he has moved in with a man. This has been a hard pill for her to swallow. And so having the aliveness of Lou and the baby in her life seems to be filling some kind of void, or at least being a welcome distraction. Lou does things like she finds a juicer that is still in its box on some top shelf in Margot's kitchen. She takes it down and starts juicing lemons. Margot can't even remember that she had the juicer. And what Lou does is she takes all the lemon juice that she's made, adds some sugar that Margot finds for her, and she goes downstairs to her van, which is parked in front of the apartment building, and she sells lemonade to people. Now this mortifies Margot. She's so worried what the neighbors will think, let alone already what the neighbors will think. Having her son's ex-girlfriend stay with them, and a baby that they had out of wedlock, she is in store for potentially getting many judgments from people around her. And this does not make her happy. At another point, Margot talks about all the paintings that are in the apartment. This was the apartment that she had with her husband, and it's university housing. She needs to act like her husband is still living there in order to stay living there. And as a result, she's leaving everything up as it is, so that nobody will wonder. And yet she does not like the paintings that her husband has left there. She let Lou know this, and Lou does what Lou does. If you're not happy with something, then you change it. So Margot comes home one afternoon and finds Lou has all the paintings off the walls, and she has some paints, and she is prepared to paint these canvases over. Well, for Margot, this is out of control. It's out of her control. This is her home, and she is not happy that Lou would just go do this without asking permission, without any respect for this being Margot's home. These things that are a no-brainer for Lou. She lives life as if life is too short for consequences. She doesn't care about the consequences of things as long as what she does makes her happy. This is a big lesson for Margot to learn in her life, but at the same time, Lou doesn't know where to stop. Clearly, she's taken a baby, and she doesn't understand the grave consequences involved in this. Her feeling was that she was rescuing this baby from a mother who would be a terrible mother, neglectful, and this poor baby would grow up probably very dysfunctional. And yet Lou is blind to the fact that what she has done is a major crime. However, it starts catching up with her once the police are starting to get more involved, and they've put word out to the press about this missing baby. For Lou, at this time, it's just a challenge to keep the baby and herself hidden, and it's some time before she takes that seriously. Now, the movie also flips back to Carolyn's story. Carolyn really had hoped so many times that she wouldn't have a baby, that she felt her baby had ruined her life. And yet when this happens, when her baby is gone, her world comes crashing down around her, and she realizes how much she really wants her baby. This terrible situation really wakes her up, makes her grow up, and help her be humbled and understand the level of responsibility she has when she has to take care of another human, in fact, her own daughter. As a result of this experience of Lou taking the baby, all three women transform on some level. They all go through deeply tough moments. Margot, among these three, seems to be the one that has some level of insight. She's very reflective, and she recognizes that humans are just thoroughly flawed, every single one of them, and that it's important to find some way to forgive them and to forgive yourself. This movie is full of beautiful messages like that, and they are revealed very skillfully. The story seems to find just the right elements to keep the audience involved and at the same time, learn such lessons as the importance of family ties, forgiveness, being honest and truthful, and how we all impact each other as we try and make our way through the world. Speaking of honesty, when I looked at some of the movies that were from the Sundance Film Festival that were being shown on Netflix and I saw this one, I had passed over this movie a number of times. I'm not sure why. It just wasn't jumping out at me. The summary on Netflix of this movie is, while searching for her ex-boyfriend, a young drifter impulsively kidnaps a baby from a neglectful mother and pretends the child is her own. I don't know, I guess that seemed like far-fetched enough a story that I just wasn't super interested, even though the cast was great. Now that I've seen the movie, my opinion has changed. The acting in this movie was amazing. Each scene was so well crafted. The characters were believable, they were human and real, and they were all in transitional places trying to make things work. And these actors didn't hold back around the ups and downs that are involved with this. The majority of the scenes were just between two people. And in that way, I would say that this movie is pretty theatrical, but the scenes were so well crafted, and they gave the actors a great amount of opportunity to follow their instincts, to make discoveries in the moment, and to bring out surprising aspects of these characters. I also appreciated that this is mainly the story of 3 women. Of course, there are men who impact the situations, but it's mostly about how these women find their power, how they set aside their own wants and needs in order to work through things with the other women, and it's about them making discoveries for themselves. And the script had to be very well written. In some ways, I'd say that each scene felt kind of like a piece of candy. It would be so sweet and so good, I couldn't wait to get the next one. In terms of the filming of this movie, I can't say that so much of what was shown is highly beautiful. That wasn't the point, and frankly, Lou, as a character, really didn't care whether things were clean or not. But the story did do some interesting things. There were many moments, in particular with Lou, where she would have a dream or a fantasy, and the movie would show us what that dream or fantasy was before seeing what the real reality was. It's almost like much of the movie is living within Lou's mind that way, and it wasn't always easy to tell what the reality was that we were watching. An example is, at one point she is sitting down on a pier with the baby. She's not quite sure what her next move is going to be. And she has a fantasy of just leaving the baby on the pier and diving into the water and swimming away. It is clear that this is what her inner workings really want. She wants freedom. She wants to be out of this situation. She wants to escape the consequences. It is what she frequently had done. She has an inner battle about this. What is she going to do? What is the right thing to do? Will she step up? Won't she? Depending on what she does, how will she feel? I won't give the end away, but there is a clear sign that Lou, like the other women, are really growing up. So I would recommend this movie. I think especially if you're a woman, you would appreciate this movie. And this movie asks some hard questions. Questions about parenthood, marriage, relationships. Questions about, do we have the right to live freely? And to live in a way that, no matter what choices we make, it doesn't matter how it affects someone else. Is that the way to go, or isn't it? So I think anybody could relate to this movie, and there were some great scenes with some of the men, too. The acting in general was really solid. So based on that, I would recommend this movie. I was pleasantly surprised. I would say that there is some symbology that is used, one taken from a dream that Lou has, and then later, the same sort of symbology transfers over to Margot. And while I kind of understood it, it seemed a bit conceptual to me, and it was more conceptual than emotional for me. So it did miss its mark a little bit for me. I also found some little holes. For example, no one seemed to really put 2 and 2 together about how old the baby was and the time that Margot's son had left home. And also, there was a point where the son was using his mother's credit card to make purchases, and she was happy to let him have it because it was her way to make sure he was okay, to track him by the expenses, and there were no baby expenses on the credit card. There couldn't have been because there wasn't a baby before, and so this didn't really add up. And there were some other small holes that had to do with how naive Margot was, but at the same time Margot was pretty lonely, And she and Lou end up forming a really special connection. And it is really lovely to see how Margot fills a void with this new relationship she has and with the granddaughter, or supposed granddaughter. These little holes are really minor. I don't know if they would catch anyone else's attention. They did mine. But it only slightly impacts how I feel about this film. Overall, I would recommend it. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I would give this a 9. Stay tuned for the next segment of the show, when I'll be looking at the movie Lost Girls after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome to the third segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie Tallulah. I'm now going to discuss the movie Lost Girls. Lost Girls was at the Sundance Film Festival this last January, and it was released on Netflix in March. This movie is rated R. It's an hour and 35 minutes. It's based on real life and also based on a book. The book was the New York Times bestseller of the same name. It was also one of Slate's best nonfiction books of the past 25 years. It's written by Robert Kolker. The movie was directed by Academy Award nominee Liz Garbus. Her work has mostly been in documentary film, and she was nominated for an Oscar in 2016 for the documentary What Happened, Miss Simone. In 1999, she was nominated for Best Documentary for the film The Farm, Angola, USA. She did win an Emmy for What Happened, Miss Simone, for Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Special, and she also won an Emmy for Outstanding Nonfiction Special for Ghosts of Abu Ghraib. Other movies she's known for include the documentary Girlhood, Love, Marilyn, which is also a documentary, and the documentary A Dangerous Son. The lead character in this movie, Mary Gilbert, is played by Amy Ryan. She was nominated for the Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role at the Academy Awards in 2008 for the movie Gone Baby Gone. She was also one of the winners of the Best Ensemble for the movie Birdman, and that was in 2014 for the Boston Online Film Critics Association. Other movies she's been in include You Can Count on Me, Capote, and Changeling. Also starring in this movie is Thomasin McKenzie. She stars as Mary's daughter Sherry. She is also an award winner. She won the EDA Female Focus Award for Best Breakthrough Performance for the movie Leave No Trace, and that's through the Alliance of Women Film Journalists. And she won Best Supporting Actress for the Phoenix Critics Circle for Jojo Rabbit. She's been in the movies The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, The King, and True History of the Kelly Gang. She also has starred in the TV series Shortland Street and The Cul-de-sac. And Gabriel Byrne stars in this movie as Richard Dormer. He's the detective on the case. And Gabriel Byrne is an award winner too. He won a Golden Globe for the Best Performance by an Actor in a Television Series Drama for In Treatment. He's been in such movies as Julia and Julia, Miller's Crossing, Enemy of the State, Ghost Ship, and The Usual Suspects. The description that the Internet Movie Database has of this film is, when Mary Gilbert's daughter disappears, police in action drives her own investigation into the gated Long Island community where Shannon was last seen. her search brings attention to over a dozen murdered sex workers. With a description like that, there is no doubt that this is a dark movie. Yet the characters were so well drawn that I found myself being really interested in them and what made them tick, which helped actually distract a little bit from the darkness around the murdered bodies that are found. And something that I felt helped also make this movie watchable is the movie was very good at hinting at terrible things that happened without super graphically showing it. I was particularly grateful for that, considering I watched the movie very late at night. This is the kind of movie, for me, that has the potential to keep me awake, and it did not this time. So as the description says, this is the story of Mary, who is trying to find her daughter. Mary is on her way home after picking up her other younger daughters, and she gets a phone call from her daughter Shannon. And after some chatting on the call, Shannon suggests that she'll come over for dinner the next night. And we can see that Sherry, the next oldest daughter, really has some kind of attitude around Shannon. Or maybe not Shannon herself, because Sherry has a nickname for Shannon, which is Diva, and they seem to chat on the phone on their own, so they do have some kind of fond connection. But it may be that it seems the mother finds Shannon probably her favorite, and this is something that Sherry rolls her eyes at. In fact, when they get home for the ride, and when the mother starts thinking about what dinner's going to be like, she takes out some old videotapes and she plays them. And there is one tape where Shannon is singing. It looks like for some kind of contest, when she must have been maybe 8 years old. And it's very sweet, though it looks like it could have been for a talent contest or a beauty pageant, and it makes it understandable why Sherry would call her Diva as a nickname. In any case, this is a setup. And it also seems like it's a special occasion when Shannon comes over, that it may not happen all that often. And later in the movie, we found out that there was a lot of hardship between Sharon and Mary. Mary was under tough circumstances, and apparently Shannon needed to be put into foster care off and on. The fact that Shannon wants to come to dinner, that there's some kind of mending that is happening or has happened in her relationship with her mother and her sisters, well, it makes sense that it would be special that she would come over. And it was clearly something Mary was really looking forward to. She was very excited. Then cut to the next night when we're waiting for Shannon to arrive. And she doesn't show up. Mary is especially disappointed. The sisters are somewhat disappointed. Sherry calls her sister to see what might be up. And Mary just lets her off the hook. Thinks she must have just gotten busy. Maybe something came up with her boyfriend. She figured that Shannon was going to surface in a day or so. Now Sherry becomes the conscience of this family. She says things to wake her mother up to the fact that something may be really wrong. Things weren't adding up. It was highly unusual for Shannon not to show up the way that she normally does. And of course for Mary, this is her worst nightmare. The last thing she wants is for something to happen to Shannon, or any of her daughters for that matter. And it makes sense that she just wanted to deny that anything could have happened. But she listens to Sherry, and Sherry is making sense. And she is getting worried, so she is taking the bull by the horns, and she's going to do what she can to get the help from the authorities to see if they can track Shannon down. Well, something else that we do come to find out is that Shannon is a sex worker. She has advertised her services on Craigslist. And so not only does this information add an element of danger to what Shannon does and what could have happened to her, but in the eyes of others, especially men, there's a certain level of disrespect and devaluing of what her life was worth. So when Mary and her daughters show up at the police station that is local to where Shannon lives, which is a good amount of time away, the police detectives pretty much dismiss her. They don't take the allegations seriously of what could have actually happened to Shannon. They think, oh, she's probably just gotten into some kind of situation, and it's just a matter of time that she'll find her way back home. Well, Mary has had it with being dismissed and not being taken seriously. She becomes committed to doing whatever it takes in order to find out what happened to Shannon. Her hope is that Shannon will be found alive, but she recognizes that the reality, maybe that's not the case, but she wants to know one way or the other. She has no qualms about making a scene, speaking loudly, calling attention to what's going on. And since the police aren't really willing to help or go to the level of investigation that is necessary, she starts taking the circumstances into her own hands. She creates flyers and posts them all over the place, and she's prepared to look around the gated community where Shannon was last seen. Now, in this time, also, when the police finally start looking around a little bit, they turn up the remains of a number of bodies that are on the shore right by this gated community. This doesn't bode well for Shannon, but it also opens up a whole nother aspect to the investigation that's going to have to happen. And meanwhile, the detective, played by Gabriel Byrne, has his own troubles. He has to try to please everybody, and it seems like he's been on the job for a long time, and he has not necessarily been the star detective. And Mary refuses to let him off the hook. She's insisting his full cooperation. Meanwhile, as these bodies are found, a group of women who are connected to the victims decide that they want to hold a vigil, and they want to do it in this gated community because it was the last place these women were alive. And it turns out all of these women were sex workers. At first, Mary and her daughters, but in particular Mary, is very skeptical about this vigil. She already has opinions about the kind of women that would want to do something like this, but she reluctantly goes. Of everyone attending, she's the only one who has someone who is missing, but has not yet been found. And while Mary is not all on board with these women, she seems to find that there is some safety in numbers, and over time, she actually ends up becoming kind of a leader for them. She's the one who's not scared to be outspoken. She's the one who is not scared to go into the gated community and knock on doors and get down to business and find out what kinds of things were really transpiring. From this point forward, much of the movie is around Mary looking into what is going on in this gated community, forcing the hands of the police to take this investigation seriously, figuring out how to have what could be a normal life when her daughter is missing. Based on her own investigations, she has a sense of where her daughter's remains might be, if there are remains. And yet the police have refused to go there because it's too hard. It's a difficult area. It would have to be drained. They'd need big equipment. And after a year of searching, and when the detective is actually about to retire, Mary is at her wit's end, and she threatens that she'll go to the press if nothing is taken care of. So this movie is a lot about women finding their voice, demonstrating to a male-dominated police force how women's lives do matter. Ultimately, Mary's efforts do pay off in many ways. By having a voice and being a leader of these women who are part of this vigil, she's helped them see what their worth is, and what the worth was of the women who perished. She also wakes the police up to what their duty really is, and that they don't have the right to pass judgment on anyone based on who they are and what they do. And that people are complicated and make difficult choices, and they shouldn't be judged for that. And Mary gets to learn what she is about. She learns what going in for a fight means, what it's about to have perseverance to get what you want, that giving up won't bring justice to anyone who has perished, and she learns about her own character and the lengths she's willing to go to prove herself to be a worthy mother. Mary has struggled about what it is to be a good mother. She's done so much in her power to be the best mother that she possibly can, and yet life with Shannon in the earlier years was very difficult. As I mentioned, Shannon had been in foster homes. There is a question and an easy judgment to make on Mary, and what kind of mother she was, and how she shows up for her daughter under these particular circumstances. Well, it makes up her way to prove that she is a good mother, and she is willing to do anything that's necessary in order for her daughter to be honored and taken seriously. The acting in this movie is quite good. Like I said, it is the thing that kept me enthralled and kept me from going into the darkness, because I was so curious about these characters and where the story was going to lead them to go emotionally. Mary, played by Amy Ryan, we see her have vulnerable moments, and we see her be super strong. She has a hardened exterior, and we get to find out if her interior is also hardened or not. The detective, played by Gabriel Byrne, he does a wonderful job. I have admired his acting over the years in any case, and in this role, I really didn't see him as Gabriel Byrne. He embodied that detective, and that detective was a complex character. He had to contend with the pressures of the higher-ups. They were always breathing down his neck. He had to contend with the judgments of the detectives that were reporting to him. and he had to deal with his own level of guilt around the fact that his detectives, as it turns out, had not responded quickly enough to the calls from Shannon the night of her disappearance. And so he is on his own journey to figure out what is right. And I appreciated that this movie, which could be seen mostly as a woman's movie, really does entail the story of this detective. I appreciated that this movie brought into question what is the role of men in terms of protecting women. Even women who may have jobs that they don't condone, and who stand up for themselves and won't take no for an answer. Also, I felt the story was well woven. It felt to me like the 3 plot points around Mari and the police and the search kept getting tighter and tighter and wound up to the point that you feel the pain and the frustration of Mari just wanting to know what happened to her daughter. And the story was tight, the acting was excellent, the scenes were well drawn, and the fact that this is based on a true story makes it all the more compelling to watch. Now this is, as I mentioned before, kind of a hard movie. It is not a story that I would like to personally live through in real life, but it is certainly fascinating, and this movie is well done. Now, I know the first movie I talked about today on the podcast is a comedy thriller, the movie I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, but I can't help but paint a contrast between the two movies. In that movie, we have a woman who is a doormat who gets robbed, and she is trying to find a way to find her voice. But this is completely new for her and out of character for her. And also there is an argument around the police not doing their job in that movie. And in Lost Girls, Mari has a comfort in terms of having her voice, but she has to use it in new ways. She already seems to have the bravery and gumption that it takes in order to do what is necessary to find her daughter. Granted, this is a story based on true life, and it's a very serious movie with dark circumstances, and yet it has a similar storyline to some extent, and also deals with the police not fulfilling on their role. So I would recommend this movie. It is a good story. At the same time, it isn't a movie for everyone. I wouldn't suggest it for young people. Granted, it is rated R. But I felt it was really well done. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent, fantastic movie, I would give this a 9. For what this movie is trying to accomplish, I think it achieved what it set out to do. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show, when I'll be looking at the movie The Discovery after the break.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome to the final segment of this show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron, and in the last segment, I looked at the movie Lost Girls. In this segment, I'll be talking about the movie The Discovery. This movie came out in 2017. It's rated TVMA, meaning mature audiences, because there's some language and smoking. It is 1 hour and 42 minutes long, and it's considered a drama and mystery. This movie premiered at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival, and it came out on Netflix at the end of March in 2017. This movie was directed by Charlie McDowell, and previously he won the Special Citation Award through the San Francisco Film Critics Circle for The One I Love. And that is the only other feature film he's directed. He directed a short, and he's directed television episodes for series like Silicon Valley, but he seems to be a relatively newcomer in terms of directing. And based on that, it's amazing that Robert Redford is starring in his movie. And in 2002, he received an honorary award as actor, director, producer, creator of Sundance, and more at the Academy Awards. He also won an Oscar for directing the movie Ordinary People. And another coup for this director is that Mary Steenburgen is in this movie. She has a brief scene at the very opening, and she's another Oscar winner. She won Best Actress in a Supportive Role for Melvin and Howard. She's known for the movies Life as a House, I Am Sam, The Proposal, and The Help, among many appearances on television. Jason Segel stars in this movie. He's the winner of the ASCAP Film and Television and Music Awards for the top box office films Forgetting Sarah Marshall. He also won the Best Actor Award for the movie The End of the Tour at the Film Club's The Lost Weekend Awards. He's been in such movies as The Good Humor Man, Knocked Up, and The 5-Year Engagement. And also in this movie is Rooney Mara. She has been nominated for 2 Oscars. She was nominated for Best Performance by an Actress in a Supporting Role for Carol, and Best Performance by an Actress in a Leading Role for The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. Other movies she's been in include A Nightmare on Elm Street, Her, and A Ghost Story. Now this movie in theme reminded me of the movie Flatliners. The original came out in 1990, and then it was remade. And the remake came out the same year this movie did, in 2017. And the theme has to do with whether or not there is a life after death. The summary of this movie on Netflix reads, a scientist whose proof of an afterlife caused a rash of suicides forges ahead with his research while his disapproving son falls for a troubled woman. I'd say that captures it pretty well. So the opening of this movie is pretty powerful. It starts out with an interview, and it is between the characters played by Robert Redford and Mary Steenburgen. So right away we have these 2 powerful actors kicking off this movie. Robert Redford plays Dr. Harbour, and he is the doctor who has been doing all kinds of work around finding life after death. And the premise is that he has discovered that there is life after death. He knows that it exists, he can prove that it exists, but he has yet to show us where people actually go after they die. And this is what Mary Steenburgen's character, a reporter, is pressing him on. And Robert Redford plays the kind of character he plays best. He plays a rebel who seems to have information or knowledge about something that nobody else has. Robert Redford's characters always seem to have some kind of inside scoop. Now, in and of itself, this information about life after death is fascinating. By revealing it to the public, Dr. Haber didn't recognize that he was giving people a free ticket to take their lives so that they can start over. As a result, many people have taken their own lives, not wanting to face the pain of life today. In fact, more than 4 million people. And in this opening, something graphically demonstrates the tragedy of what has happened as a result of this information. And we get to see Dr. Haber live in terms of how he responds and the level of responsibility he feels he has with regard to how the information that gets out there is landing. After this intense opening, we have a shift in scene. There is a man who is on a ferry. This is Jason Segel's character, Will, and we learn that he is Dr. Harbour's son. He goes inside the cabin of the ferry, and there's a television news program that is playing and is talking all about the suicide rate as a result of the discovery of Dr. Harbour. He turns off the TV, and then he hears a voice, and there is a woman played by Rooney Mara, whose name is Isla. She says she was watching that. Well, she and Will end up striking up a conversation. There clearly is an attraction between the two of them, but once the boat lands, they go their separate ways. Will gets picked up from the ferry by his brother Toby, who is in a pickup truck. Toby is a real character. He is played by Jesse Plemons, and he was in Bridge of Spies, American Maid, and The Irishman. And in terms of casting, I have to say, Toby and Will seem utterly opposites. They're different in hair color and body type, in character, nothing at all. I didn't believe that they were really brothers, so there's something. On the other hand, they did have a really good connection. Anyway, they arrive at what is the new home for Dr. Harbour, and this is an enormous mansion. Now, Will apparently didn't even know that his father had moved. The father is really paranoid. He knows that there's a lot of people who may be out for him, who want to blame him for the deaths of many people. He has created a compound that is secure where he can continue doing experiments, and we learn that he is hoping to come up with what does happen after life to truly answer the questions that people have. It's something that he does ultimately feel like he owes people, but he also owes it to himself because his own wife had committed suicide even before he started all of this work, and this is something that he unconsciously is trying to work out for himself. Once Will and Toby arrive, the audience in Will's shoes gets an introduction to what this place is like. It is enormous, and there's a lot of people that Robert Redford's character, Dr. Harbour, have brought in. They're lost souls who are looking for something to believe in, and yet it seems somewhat like a cult. So after Will gets the lay of the land, he goes out and looks at the ocean, and this is a place where he himself has a memory. It's a memory that he's not sure was truly a memory or if he really did have a near-death experience, and it was something from life after death. So at the beach where this is happening, he happens to see the character Isla, who herself is getting ready to take her own life by putting weights around her and walking out into the ocean. And he goes and saves her. She is really angry about it, but he expresses to her her need to stay alive. And she goes with him back to her father's compound. Now this is also very important because we get to see how Dr. Harbour works. In order for her to stay at the compound, she needs to have an interview and pass it. And we, as an audience, then see what it's like to be able to be part of Dr. Harbour's project and efforts. We also get to see that Will and his father have some major differences. We learn that Will is a neurologist, he has certain information, he doesn't condone what his father is doing, and in fact he hasn't been to visit his father in some time. And yet on this trip, what we learn is Dr. Harbour claims that he has discovered indeed a way of seeing what happens after somebody dies. Will thinks this is going to be more dangerous and not a help to find out this information, and so he is ready to sabotage what is going on. Only as he does this, he actually makes the discovery privately that indeed his father has stumbled onto something, and he wants to investigate it before anything more comes of it and word comes out in the press. He wants to keep people safe. And of course Isla, who is Will's love interest, and the jury is still out as to whether Will is Isla's love interest, he clues her in on what he is doing once she has passed her father's interview and is able to stay. So together they go on an investigation and they find that things are not adding up based on what they have seen with regard to someone's afterlife and what has happened in reality. And so they go on to work on solving this mystery. And eventually they're able to share the information with Dr. Harbour. They make a discovery about life after death and realize that it is not exactly what they thought it was. I found this to be an interesting movie. I was fascinated by the characters. New information kept being revealed about them, and this kept me wanting to continue watching the movie. Now, there was something about this movie that felt like it was from some kind of sci-fi movie back in the 1960s or 70s. It had almost this grainy quality to it. There also didn't seem to be a clear sense of time, what year this took place in. It seems like it's modern day, but it has a surreal quality because of all these deaths that are happening. And frankly, today, with everything that's happening with the coronavirus, it didn't seem too far from the truth. It's just the deaths were happening in a very different way. And now, how I outlined the story, it feels like I've just scraped the surface. In some ways, I think there's actually too much that's happening in this movie. We have what's going on with the characters, and there are quite a few characters. And there's what's at stake in terms of the experiments that the doctor is doing. And this is about, is his experiment going to work? And if it does, is it going to impact people the same way the first experiments did and the information was revealed and many people took their own lives? Then there's this whole angle about, are the people who are at this compound indeed kind of a cult? And then there's these little through lines of stories around what happened to Will's mother because she took her life, what happened to him when he had this near-death experience as a child, and then we learn that Isla had experienced her own family tragedy. And we get to see, indeed, what Toby is thinking. There's also this whole sense of suspicion and lack of trust. There is just a lot going on, and it is kind of all over the place. It didn't feel completely well organized, and yet perhaps that was somewhat intentional to reflect some of the messiness around what life after death can look like. However, I experienced enough holes in this movie that I think it had more to do with a poor script. And in fact, I think it is because there were such great actors in this movie that the movie was saved. It seemed at times this movie couldn't decide quite what it was. It had this sort of sci-fi quality, and yet, again, it was like an early sci-fi, so it was amateurish. At moments it seemed comedic. I felt like this movie took itself too seriously. And at other times, this seemed like a mystery. And then, of course, there's this huge theme about life and death. It seemed like this movie was trying to be this massive movie, and it just didn't really come together for me. Granted, I do like the discovery that was indeed made at the end of the movie. And besides the acting, I'd say it was these little epiphanies along the way that did keep me going. And at the same time, I was frustrated. So, for example, at the beginning, we have this whole mystery unravel around what is Dr. Harbour up to. And then he determines in order to move forward with an experiment, he needs a cadaver. And there's this whole scene where the main characters go off and claim a body. And frankly, that was pretty funny. And then there's a scene as Will is trying to make discoveries. He invites Isla in on the process. And they ended up going to meet somebody who is from the past and who may be able to shed some light onto what the reality is. As they interview this woman, she seems utterly clueless. She's completely trusting of these two people, and yet the person that she is talking to them about is someone she doesn't trust at all. It didn't add up to me that she wouldn't be suspicious of these people and that she should be cautious about the kind of information that she shares. Also, this was trying maybe to be a love story. Isla and Will did seem to have a connection, and yet at the same time, they seemed very odd together. And also, Dr. Harbour is super paranoid about anybody having information that could potentially be used against him. Now, throughout this movie, I kept wondering, what is Isla's role here? Is she just this potential love interest? She does get into this compound, and in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, is she a secret reporter? Can she really be trustworthy? And because of that, I felt there was a real opportunity for there to be a twist with regard to her. And while there was one, it was quite subtle. I feel like there really was a missed opportunity with her character. And also, she just arrived at the compound. Harbour did the questionnaire interview with her. She did pass, but suddenly she is sort of at the top level of everything that is going on with the experiments. There have been people who were there for years who don't know what's really going on. And while there is some level of explanation that some of the people are jealous of her, it still doesn't completely explain why she was trusted more than the others, and she's this newcomer who's hardly been known. Also, early on, there is this thing that is made about bunk beds. The room that Will is staying in has some bunk beds, and the brother says that he rescued these as kind of a tribute to their childhood. And interestingly enough, it turns out that Isla and Will get to share the bunk beds. And there's some discussion about them being separated, and that is the way that Isla wants it. But then later on in the movie, the two of them are in the lower bed of the bunk beds, and suddenly it looks like it is much larger, almost like a double size. Yet previously Isla said how happy she was that it was bunk beds so that they couldn't share a bed together. There's also a scene where we see Will asking Toby if he could have the keys to Toby's truck. And later on, we see that he is taking the truck out constantly. I think it would have worked better if in the first place, Will never even asked for the keys, that we just assumed that he would be able to have access to the truck. And there's a part where Will is concerned about the experiment that his father is doing, and we found out later that he had something to do with how the experiment went. And yet we should have been let in, I think, as the audience, on the ground floor of what he was up to in the first place. It came as a surprise, and not in a way that worked for the script. It felt definitely like there was a hole there. So I was super impressed with this movie around the cast. This movie has Oscar winners, Oscar nominees, and I wondered what attracted them to this movie, because I really feel the script is not that strong. I was thinking for Robert Redford and Mary Steenburgen, the fact that they are older, maybe there's some attraction around the idea of life after death, if I may be so blatant about that. But in any case, I do think it was mostly the acting that saved this movie. It's a movie that tries to go deep, but I don't think truly succeeds. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, how would I rate this movie? I'd give it a 6. I think there is some compelling information in here. There's some really good acting. The premise is fascinating. I just think the way that it is rolled out is not super successful. If you like science fiction and are curious about life after death, then this movie will probably be of interest to you. But I will say that there were other movies from Sundance that I talked about on this podcast earlier on that I gave much higher scores, and I would probably focus on those first. So I hope you enjoyed hearing about the movies from the Sundance Film Festival. The movies, again, are I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore, which I gave a 10, Tallulah, which I gave a 9, Lost Girls, which I also gave a 9, and The Discovery, which I gave a 6. Here's to these movies offering you some inspiration. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.